Um, actually, before I start, I think Justin, did you have anything to say as the moderator?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, this is Justin Smith. I work for Goldman Sachs. I'm the moderator for this session in room 5. The session is called Start and Grow Data Analytics Part 2. It's actually a follow-up from last year's conference if you were here. Um, yeah, and sorry, apologies about that. The speaker is Chris Rains. And with that, he's the founder of InfoRight. I'm going to go ahead and hand over to him. Chris, go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Justin. I appreciate it. Yep. And what I've told Justin to everyone, please do submit your questions. I encourage as many questions as possible. And, one of the pieces of feedback last year was there just wasn't enough time for Q&A. So I'm going to do better at that. And I've asked Justin to interrupt me, halfway through our time together. Um, and actually, I could even, if there are that many questions, Justin, you can even interrupt me sooner than that. Or if you don't have that many questions yet, so we can adjust. So just so you know. So please do submit your questions and ask, anything's on the table. Um, that'd be good. Great. A little bit about me. So I did start a consulting company called InfoRight. It was actually originally called Right Data, but I found out there's another company called that in Florida, and they were around before me. So I did talk with a lawyer, and he suggested, you know what, just change your name is probably the easiest route. So I did, and that's okay. And I still have business, so I guess it was okay. Some background about that, or about me besides that. So I did start in technology when I was 8 years old. My dad told us we could choose between having a pool to swim in, or a computer. Right? But he kind of had a bias in that decision, and so we really didn't. He asked us, but then he just kind of got the computer. So that's the way it went. So we just had a little kiddie pool instead. But we did have an IBM PC Junior, and so I started programming in BASIC when I was 8, and played some two-dimensional games and other cool things like that that you could do in the 1980s with Microsoft, actually. And so I did start InfoRight about 2 years ago. It's actually been going, yeah, it's a little bit longer than 2 years now. Before that, I worked at a company called Health Catalyst. It's based in Salt Lake City here, and they've been growing and having some success. So that was a great time at that company. They've actually gone public since I left. So they continue to grow. Before that, I was at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, and worked in trading technology and operational support. Um, and I've always been very process oriented and analytically minded, and sometimes to a fault, I bet my wife would say. And master black belt certified. So I did get a master black belt at Bank of America, and that getting up to that from a green belt to a black belt to a master black belt involved about 8 weeks of in class training, but then a bunch of work as well. So it was pretty intense. And so a lot of training in data science, in addition to an MBA. So anyway, so have my career and my time, I've always had it kind of revolve around data, or building things virtually, coding. That's the background I have. Great. Keep going. So this is the first time I'll ask this. What do you want to learn today? What questions do you have for me? And I would invite everyone to submit a question you have now, or submit it as we go along. And if we can fit in, responding to it, we'll make that part of the agenda. So, and I already talked with Justin and Greg. We won't probably be doing informal polls, because my understanding is there's a little bit of a delay between my speaking and when you hear it, but that's okay. So we'll keep going, and this is great. So please do submit questions. So what's my goal for today? Well, overall, I want you to know you can have your cake and you can eat it too. There's that saying, you can't have your cake and eat it too. It's a weird saying, and I've never really understood it, and so I never agreed with it. But so my point here is that you can have your cake and eat it too, um, but sometimes the bites are really small, and then sometimes they're really, really big. And often the bites are just frequently they're never the exact size you predicted. And so that's entrepreneurship, and that's what it's been like growing company. And you can be an entrepreneur. And I put together a few suggested steps in a checklist, and we'll get to that.
Hey, Chris, we
Yeah,
actually do have a question that came through.
yeah,
What are the most common analytics need to see in organizations you're working with?
yeah. So the most common. So let me get to that. Actually, that's probably next. So um, this may answer some of that. We are so, and by the way, I put in the slide, we are hiring contractors right now mainly. Um, in client operations, but the clients mainly what they have requested is work in data manipulation, SQL, for example. Definitely looking for people with cloud tool experience, and that's because the clients are analysis, visualization, and dashboarding and BI tools experience. Tools such as Tableau, Power BI, ClickView, Google Data Studio, and there's a bunch of BI tools. Um, they're also looking for, and I'm kind of telling the tools. I'm not really telling you. I'll show you a few slides, and you can see examples of to directly answer that. That's coming right after this. But also predictive analytics. Customers are asking for that, and data science related needs. Um, and so that involves using tools like Python, R, Jump, SAS, and some others. Yeah, so if you are, I'll finish answering the question, but just wanted to put in a plug. If you are interested in helping as a contractor at this point, please reach out to me, and there's my email address. And so now, just gonna to further answer that, yeah, I just actually I think I literally copied and pasted that slide. So what do we do for clients? They ask us to do these sorts of things, and um, and then also we do have our first in-house application that we've started to build and licensing it to the first customer, and that's one that's been built in Node.js um, and it's a scraper that's it works with LinkedIn and is scraping some data from there. Turns out, not surprisingly, there's a lot of competitors in that space, but we're working to find a niche there, and I'm excited about that. So now let's more directly answer your question. Um, so what do we do, and what we do these things that because clients request them. So what do? We architect. So this is a product of um, this is a product that one customer wanted. They wanted more of design work, and so it was cloud architecture, and so we make pictures, and I use a tool called Lucid Chart, and I say I, but it's also we. It's myself, and then there I've I there's about 6 or 7 contractors, and of those, about 4 to 5 that I'm actively working with. Actually, I'd say there's like 10 total that I have worked with in the last 2 years, and about 4 to 5 that I'm actively working with right now. And some are full. Well, let's see, one's full time, and then the other 3 are part time, anywhere from 10 to 25 hours a week. Uh, and what does Yeah, so this is one thing that people have requested from us. So that's a little different, right? It's not necessarily analytical, but in a way it very much is, and it's the prep work before you can use the analytical tools. So this is a cloud architecture diagram to set up a Internet of Things. There's a company that's public, and they've got a pretty old school design, a pretty old school architecture, including their software, and they needed to get really up to date and use the latest and greatest things like serverless technology um, and those things that are available in the cloud that can benefit them to reduce their costs. So that's one thing we did. All right, so now that's not so analytical, you might say. Well, there's some in that, but there's also, and then this is kind of, but it's also, it can look pretty bland. We architect. So for one client, a different client, this is a financial services company based in San Diego. And this has been a multi-month thing. So they wanted a document and this is just a snippet from a 30-page document, is one of the things we did, which details the design that we were building for them. So that's another another thing that we do. Um, Another thing that clients have asked for, this is actually the same client, but just designed um, an architecture for them. So we developed data warehouses, so we had to build it from the ground up. So they needed to understand the design, and they already have an IT department, so we couldn't just work in a vacuum. So we needed to talk to them about the architecture and exactly what analytical tools we would be setting up and how, and they needed to make sure it was going to be secure. Of course, it needed to be secure because they're financial services. It's actually a credit union. I said company, they're not a company. They're a credit union. But that's so, and they have several branches there in Southern California. So that's another thing that we've done. Okay, here we kind of get more into some of the analytical, the fun stuff. I think I call it. So although it's really all fun, but in different ways. But so we make dashboards. This is a dashboard that we made for a. They sell rings, silicone rings, and so I know there are a few of those. But this is a manufacturer and retailer and resell and seller of silicone rings, all different styles and colors and families of rings, and they've even gotten into bracelets. But that's another thing that we did. And behind the scenes, I will say, um, one of the things that we really had to work on that you don't see evidence of, except you see the kind of the end result, is just all the validation, the data validation, and making sure the source matches the destination. And if they had multiple sources, those didn't always agree in counts and amounts. And man, there's so much work that can be done there. And so, anyway, not to be not just I just want to mention that that's part of what we had to do as well, on the back end, which really ties this dashboard to this and this and this and the stuff that some people think it's boring. Some people really love it. So anyway, it's all kind of interesting. Um, just a couple more. Just breeze through. Um, Hopefully, this is answering that question, by the way. So let us know, in the Q&A or in the comments, let us know if this is answering the question or if you have follow-up questions. So a couple others, we've created interactive tools. This is another kind of dashboarding. This was done in Power BI, which is Microsoft product. And you see a couple buttons in there. This is just a screenshot, but some filters and buttons and the date filter that you can use. And, all the bar charts are fully interactive. So a lot of good stuff there. This was used to help test and see if they're workers at a mine. So this is a mine based in Nevada. They actually mine gold, and they wanted to make sure that their underground miners uh, um, were using some tablets and an application that we set up for them. And so This was to help measure their usage and see if they were even using it. So yeah, that's what this was. And this is a different mine, one based in Florida, and uh, this is an administration app that we built and we did it actually also in a Microsoft tool called Power Apps, and it was built to help them um, be sort of an administration of their. They have so many different locations and areas and routes that their drivers drive to make sure that, for example, that the water that they have that they've used for mining and that has tailings in it, which is really a pollutant, they had to make sure that that doesn't spill over into a place in the environment that it's not allowed to be, and that's really critical. So anyway, all of that is done through through um, through this. Well, this application helps them to. And this one screen just shows part of it, but this application or applications we designed help them to do that. So we created interactive tools, apps, and and then more of analytical tools. So this is another one, and so this is also for that same mind, helping them to see utilization of their vehicles and suggesting, and this one as well. This one suggesting, in this case, there was actually some data points we saw way up here for heavy equipment, and really you could scrutinize all of these dots above this line, average line, as areas where there could be improvement and looking at these ones out here, these were really an outlier, and then these ones over here. And so part of what we do is point out the data in pictures that help them to see opportunities for either improvement or standardization, or at least to understand what's happening at their mind. So that's another thing we did, and so that's another tool. Great. So hopefully that answers that question. And um, yeah. Okay, let us know if that answered your question or not in the Q&A. How are we doing, Justin? Any other questions so far?
Not at this time.
Okay, good. All right, let's keep going. All right, so a little bit about InfoRight. So I debated how much should I talk about InfoRight versus general advice, and a checklist, which I'll get to, and some lessons learned. But I figured hearing the raw story and information would help people understand how it is. So 2018, I actually left in 2018, left from my full-time employment in August. And so from there, a little bit of revenue before then, I was moonlighting and testing the waters. And I do recommend doing that if you can do it. If you're in a full-time employment and want to go to your own consulting company and want to start up, whether it be freelance or you want to start a company that'll grow, I do recommend first starting with moonlighting and testing the waters, if you can. So yeah, so with that, when I left, so in September, from September to about December, plus a little bit before that, we made about 70K in revenue. And then in 2019, it went up a little bit to 90K. And there's an explanation for some of that. There was a gap of about 4 months where we were not actively looking for new customers, and that was actually a good lesson learned. I would not do that again. So it sounds really obvious, but as an entrepreneur, you have a ton to do, including taxes, accounting, marketing, legal stuff. And so that was kind of overwhelming. And so, I took off time to do some of that. And, I think the lesson learned there in 2019 was for me, definitely, it's do the things that are not even the things that I can do best, but I would say take care of the things that are most needful first. And yeah, and so business development, which is sales, which means more revenue, which is needed so you can even run a company, right? So you don't have to. So if you really wanted to succeed, that was a lesson learned there. So there's that. And then in 2020, I made sure to follow that. And that so far so good. We're getting to where this is forecast, so there's still a couple months left in the year, but it's been pretty even. So if you were to see a graph of it, it's been pretty even since April, and so we're on target to make about 320K in revenue, give or take, probably 10K or so. So and there are, that's not all just going in my pocket. Obviously, as I grow, there's been more contractors, um, who need to be paid and are doing a great job. And so, but that's part of it. But yeah, so it is growing slowly, and it's going well.
Hey, Chris,
Uh,
we have another question that just came through.
sure, yeah, please.
So the question is from Amber, and it says, how do you get started with building those relationships that lead to analytics consultant work?
How do you get started with building the relationships that lead to consulting and analytics work? Yeah, great question. Um, I would say, how do you make those relationships? Um, let me skip here. Uh, bear with me one sec. I'm gonna go to one other slide in my appendix because I want you to see a few things, and I think this will help to talk about this, and then we can go back. And this is great. This is the sort of thing I love. Oh shoot, it didn't go. All right, hold on. I went to the slide, and then when I pressed present, it went back. All right, right here. Okay, so how do you create those relationships? Well, um, I'm pulling these things up because these were an aha moment for me. I took this Strength Finders quiz when I was at Health Catalyst, one of my managers who I really respect. She was actually my skip level manager, Susan, and she's retired now. But she really impacted me. I loved how I loved a lot of the things that she did and the maturity with which she led our extended team. But one of the things that she did was she had us take a Strengths Finders quiz, and then we presented the results. And how does that relate to relationships? Well, and developing relationships, which is Amber's question. So, um, so here's the results of our team, and you can see me here. I'm number 4, and in here you see ideation, kind of soft, but ideation turned out to be my first strength, so my top strength, I guess, if you will. Think of these as in order of importance or in order of strength, I guess. So ideation was a top strength, and then strategic. And then the reason why I'm bringing this up is woo. So what is this woo strength? And it was one of mine, and it wasn't the top, but it was one of mine. And so woo actually stands for it's the book's the author's word for winning others over. So it's an acronym for that. And so what that means is I like to I like to talk with other people, or at least have them see. I like to collaborate, talk with, and have them see my side of things and persuade if I can. So and then there's adaptability and learner. But so how does that if you go in and look at I don't know if I had the definition of that anywhere in here. I don't know if I did. Nah, I maybe a little bit about woo, executing influence. Yeah, here we go. Influencing and relationship building. So a lot of what our team members had were strengths in strategic thinking and executing, and that is super important, right? All of these are important, but one of the attributes for sales is, and we did it, our team was actually less in, we were less strong in these two areas, which are more kind of sales-ish type attributes. So relationship building and influencing. And so that's why I'm mentioning woo is I realized, hey, I don't necessarily have all of these attributes when I took the quiz. They're not all manifest. And you guys can already tell I'm not the best communicator you've ever heard. But I do have, what do I have? And so I started with woo, with that winning others over. And so, to answer Amber's question maybe more directly, where I'm going with this is maybe you could take this quiz or another like it and see. I would encourage you to do that to see maybe you don't have all the sales attributes or down here adaptability, correct, right, developer, empathy, harmony. There's a bunch and a lot of good detail about those if you read the book. But I did have one of them, and so I thought, "Well, how can I leverage that?" And you know what? Honestly, I was not leveraging that at my full-time job much, maybe a little, between employees, but I wanted to use it with customers. So, if you find an attribute like that, Amber, I'd encourage you to, you know, think about, are you using it now? And if not, how do you use it? Because if you take the quiz, you realize there's some reason why you answered that way. So you must use that. And so that's one way you must use it in some area of your life. So that's a thing you could examine. So that's one thing I'd encourage you to do. And so that's kind of more soft. But now kind of besides that, and then I'll go back to the as I'm going scrolling back, I would suggest then what are some actual things you can do besides that, besides looking at your strengths? I would say um, I would say that you should go to I have a con here we go. So this can help answer that question as well. Um, how do you strike up relationships? Well, there's a bunch of different ways we can do it. And sometimes it's harder. For example, if you feel like you're an introvert, I don't know how you feel about yourself and whether you are or not. I personally feel like everyone's an introvert in some situations and an extrovert in others. Anyway, but and no one's ever one or the other all the time, um, is my opinion. But so that said, go to a conference or event, and if you feel like you'd never talk with someone, then make it a goal to for yourself, hey, trying to start a business here, so I'm making a personal goal to talk to 2 people, and then ask them about what they do. And that's a key with relationships is you don't want to talk so much about you. You want to talk about what they do and learn about them and what they need. Um, so that's really key. And then just listen. And so that listening and understanding is so critical. And that's that is a sales tactic, and it's sincere. So that's one way. Some other ways that you can um, improve, relationship building are networking in person, or, just even with friends. But um, maybe you have a LinkedIn account. I do personally, and I've made it a goal to, when I do have downtime, or when I did, yeah, I should do it even when I don't, is just schedule once, at least once or twice every week or 2 weeks, to meet with someone that and that's another way. So, and all these things will lead to business development because you're going to be telling them what you do. In the meantime, they'll want to know what you do when you find out what they do. And um, I've found that, you know, there's some percentage of the time they have those people have a need, or they know someone who is going to have a need that will be business for you. And then some others online on, LinkedIn or SEO, advertising. Some of these I don't even do yet, or from a third party. There are shell companies. So, one example of that is I had a friend who worked at Health Catalyst, and he had moved on, started his own company, and there's a company that reached out to him. He couldn't help him, and so I took that. That was one of my first multi-month contracts, and that was through a subcontract, and it was through a third party. So that worked out great. So that's another way. And then referrals, repeat business um, is one. So repeat business is meaning, you already had business with them, and then hopefully you do a good job such that they want to work with you again. And then there's platforms online as well. Actually, I think my first three um, contracts for business were through Upwork. So, and one of the pros of Upwork is it's online, and it is really it's a marketplace, and so you can go there, and it's uh, for me, it was, I started, and within a month I had my first project, and then really, I think within about 2 months, I had two projects, and that was moonlighting while I was at Health Catalyst, but just trying the waters a little bit, dipping my toe in. And yeah, I mean, the first one was, I'm chuckling. I mean, the first one was for a few hours of work, and it was really a very low rate of pay, and I think the per hour rate, and ultimately it was, I think the revenue that I got in was something like $90. It's not a whole lot, and it's not going to pay my rent. Maybe it'll pay yours, but it wouldn't pay mine. But it was the first one, and I got a good rating from it, and so the short term, excuse me, strategy there was to find more clients, and so to do that, they have to rate you, and anyway, so you play the game there. So that was helpful too. So hopefully, Amber, I've given you some ideas of things that you can do, um, and let me know if that helped. Yeah. And okay, so that's how I've struck up relationships and worked on business development. And by the way, guys, I will say one other thing on this is, you know, there's nothing wrong with these online platforms, but well, I should say, there's nothing. I've found that there's some cons to using them, and one of them is just you're beholden to some middleman company to not only take a percentage of what you're making ongoing, even though all they did really was set up the relationship, right, between you and someone who is buying your services. Um, so they did a service, but then you're also beholden to them for the payment terms and some other things, and they have some weird things on their platform. So I knew early on I wanted to get away from that, and besides, I didn't want to just be a freelancer. I wanted to grow a company that would be sustainable, and it's on a path to get there. InfoRight is, but it's not there yet. But actually, still two of InfoRight's smaller clients are actually still that we still have. They're from Upwork. So, there was value there, and that was the way that I started. And by the way, that first client that I had that was about a $90 revenue client, it was, he actually owed me, I think it was like 130 more and he never paid. So it's really laughable that the smallest revenue client was in terms of percentage of the bill that was never paid, it was from him. But yeah, it was a good client and good project. And then the second client was actually about $7,000. So, a bit more. And actually that was a better experience. And also, uh, uh, he did pay. So that was good. Good. All right. Let me go back here and see. I told you I'd fill up the time, and we wanted to leave time for. Okay, you know what? We're at already halfway through the presentation. Hopefully, this has been beneficial so far. I wanted to share this checklist and talk a little bit about this. But before I do, Justin, any other questions so far?
Not at this time.
Okay, good. All right. All right. And Amber and then whoever submitted the first, let me know if you feel like your question was not answered. So I'm happy to talk more. Or let us know if it was answered. That'd be good to know too. Okay, so here's a suggested checklist I put to start and grow an analytics business. So I already talked a little bit about the first point, know your strengths. So what should you do and what should you delegate? And yeah, what do you tend to do naturally and what do you not do? You guys noticed in that matrix that I showed, um, some of my coworkers were more heavier on the uh, I think of it as execution, but it's getting stuff done. And my top couple of strengths were either talking to people or coming up with ideas, and that's not going to get stuff done. So definitely, I recognized early on either I need to actively change my habits, which I think I've done to some degree, or I also needed to find other people who could help, and I've also done that, and so I've learned to delegate some work, and that's been helpful as well. And um, so definitely, I try to get other people and a team surrounding me, who are smarter than me, or at least can, or who have strengths in areas where I do not have strengths, where maybe I'm weaker, and that has helped to build things up and um, yeah, to really just to support the general goal that I have of helping to build InfoRight into a going concern. So that's my goal, and I continue to drive towards that. All right, so there's that. Know your strengths and what should you delegate, and what can you delegate right now, and can you afford to um, right now? So I've been able to find some contracts that would pay such that I can delegate some things and pay subcontractors. Um, all right, so your financial needs can guide your strategy. So I had some savings that helped, and I did dip into that some. I'm no longer doing that, which is good, but I did, to be frank. Um and part of that is simply there's a lag between, I mean, I started doing work in September right after I left Health Catalyst. I had it lined up, but I didn't get paid for that initial work. Actually, that first contract was paying pretty decently, but there were some subsequent to that in 2019 where, I'd do the work in December, wouldn't get paid until like the end of January. So either yes, yeah. So basically, the checklist point here means either savings, or I used some savings and then I also dipped into a line of credit, which I've now paid off. So these are normal things that all businesses have to consider no matter how big they are. um, your sources of funding are either your retained earnings or you get an investment. So I invested in my own company, or um, you borrow. And borrowing is always you always have to consider whether it's really worthwhile or not. And in my case, I knew revenue was coming in, and so I knew I could do that. So yeah, those are some things to consider. Also, create demand, and those we've talked about that quite a bit already. But I gave some ideas of how to create demand, and hopefully how to it gave you some idea of how to strike up relationships. And uh, and there's different ways. Some are platforms, some are conferences and networks and so forth, networking and so forth. Um, I also, as a checklist item, so, some of you do this naturally, be the best worker, and so, but it's worth putting here as a checklist item, be the best worker, um, because that leads to repeat business, and that's part of what will help you to grow your business. So freelancing is okay for me, and it has been a significant portion of the revenue, but without anyone else helping. But I realized early on that it would not do if I wanted to truly grow um, the business and make it into a going concern. And my goal is to build a business that I can actually sell later on, or do something with it. Basically, have something that would keep going even if I walked away from it. So little by little, I'm getting it there. And also, I recommend delegating to contractors you know and trust. Right now, they're all contractors, and that's not going to do. Ultimately, InfoRight's going to need full-time employees, but contractors are a really great way that's lower risk to get help and test out your concepts of services with other people. Meaning, your concept of selling your services in a certain area, data and analytics in mind, to a company, and uh, and contractors are basically, it's their time until you no longer need them, and that's okay. So it's kind of lower risk than an employee, but ultimately there are definitely benefits to having an employee. Um, and so we've and actually we've been looking at getting our first employee for the past couple months. It's just we're still kind of in the gray line between not so comfortable with the amount of capital we have plus a buffer to do that versus having it. So that's where things are there. Yeah, and then I also have in the checklist set targets, aggressive targets if you want to grow, and most importantly, enjoy it. So that is the checklist, the suggested checklist to start and grow an analytics, a data and analytics company, um, and what I've followed. And um, yeah, let's see. Other info right now. We've talked about these. Um, I do have some. I do have some more material, but I should pause here because I wanted to leave. So, any other questions so far, Justin?
Just one, and it's from the moderator Justin Smith.
Okay.
I actually had a question in regards to how do you overcome challenges of having to uh, obtain the datas that you're analyzing or the data you're analyzing from these different companies, and basically where they're coming from and how it could be different formats for wherever you go. How do you overcome that obstacle?
Yeah. Well, so you're saying how do I overcome it? Because the data because because the data can be in different formats, or more because they're just generally speak to the challenges of working with the data on the back end. Is that kind of where you're going with that
Yeah,
question?
basically from the perspective of when you're trying to gather this data and you're getting it from company A and they have it into one format, or they're using SQL, or they're using whatever place to store their data, and then company B has a completely different format, complete different locations, and how do you kind of overcome those obstacles?
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to scale when it's different for each, right? Yeah. Well, first of all, and that is a challenge. The first thing I've done is structure the contracts such that so far mine have been time and materials based, and so we have an hourly rate we charge, and then so that means if it goes over, um, we don't want it to go over, and neither does the client. But sometimes because of those things you pointed out, you know, things just it takes more time than a day to do to get data set up and to validate it and so forth. And so yeah, so for one thing, we it's the contracting, and I think it starts with that. So that way we're not worried about doing it right, because we will get paid, and that's not about gouging or or getting more than we deserve or earned. It's more just making sure we don't get less than we deserve because it can take a significant amount of time to do data setup and validation and formatting and all of that. The second thing I would say um, is don't underestimate it and set expectations up front with clients. And this is something I've learned throughout my career is and even have a checklist for it. So we have an informal checklist. We need to make it formal. Actually, I have a document somewhere um, somewhere on my laptop, but it's around data validation and also around the prep work. So there's checklists. I'm a big fan of checklists when you're getting ready to enter a contract, checklists when you're architecting, checklists when you're setting things up, the checklist when you have the data all set up and it's running, nightly and you have nightly data loads, checklists to make sure that that's done correctly and that it's valid data. So I'm a big fan of checklists. And that way you don't have to have repeat work, and that does help to reduce that variation too from client A to client B to client C. Um, and yeah, and then I think I mentioned this, but definitely um, emphasizing to people up front that hey, it's going to take a while. This is no insignificant thing, and it does sometimes depend. So, for example, we had one client who used two different sources. Well, actually, so they use they sell they sell products through Amazon and also through other platforms, but and Shopify and so forth. And uh, so they'd get that data in, but then and so they had that in Amazon in a Redshift database. But then they also had data. That same data would flow through a product called Stitch or an application, and Stitch helps them. They use Stitch as a sort of an inventory system to help manage their inventory. And then they also use spreadsheets, and so some of it's manual. And they asked us to come in, and our first application with our first dashboard with them was supposed to be simple. It was supposed to just show the counts and amounts of their product. And the big problem by far, I would say 80 to I would say probably about 80% of all of the effort we did was behind the scenes. It was the iceberg underneath the water. The dashboard is like, it's the iceberg that you see above, but 80% of it is underneath. And it was the same with this in this case. There was so much work to be done to match the Amazon and Shopify data with the pass through of Stitch because the company is currently using Stitch to validate their data. And we have no idea how Stitch creates their reports. And so they were depending on Stitch as a source of truth, even though, and they just assumed that that would match Amazon and Shopify, the true sources of their data. And the big problem was we had to convince them, look, first of all, we've spent more time, which is their money. We've spent more time um, doing validation because of the setup you have, and because Stitch really isn't the source of truth. And you know, it's hard to it is a hard thing unless you include that in upfront sales conversations and contracting, even to convince someone that yeah, this is going to take time even to figure out what the source of truth is and do the validation and all of that and get past that hurdle. So that was a significant, in that case, that was actually it was it was significant the blockers that created, and we ended up giving them uh, some free time basically because we wanted to keep them as a client. So I knocked off some of the time that we put in, and so you make business decisions like that. I could have walked away. They did end up paying again. They resumed paying us, but it was there were some pain points in there, all because it's not because we were doing a bad job. It's not because they were lying to us or anything. It's simply a misunderstanding of the situation with the data. And that led to yeah, it's the iceberg underneath the waters. And I think that's probably a common thing. I bet if I asked, people in this in this virtual room, I bet other people have had similar experiences. But so hopefully that helps to kind of go into an example. And does that kind of answer the question there?
Sure does.
Cool. Yeah. Let's see. Any other questions at this point?
Not at this time.
Not okay. All right. So let me go a little bit more into um, then in that case. Um, let's see. I could talk about where did it start in the panel on entrepreneurship. Um, I think I'm gonna. Uh, I could talk about that. Um, Maybe I'll just go over these. So for the time that's remaining, so we'll just talk a little bit about lessons learned and observations. Um, so because I think these are important points that I wanted to make as well. So some of these I've already touched on, but I would say, decide if you want to start and grow a data and analytics company, um, decide if you will be a generalist or a specialist. And so for us, it's services, right? Um, InfoRight has to have a strategy, and uh, we've had to decide, do we want products versus services? And a nice thing about products is that you're going to have you have recurring revenue, and you don't have to keep creating the product every month in order for people to, or there's just economies of scale, right? You basically can leverage what you did a year ago and created something, and it can still create revenue for you today. That's the whole benefit of it. Versus a service, service can be more profitable upfront for sure. And that's actually why I started a services company, because I have a mortgage, and I've got a family to support, and I could not afford just having no revenue. So for me, the need drew that helped to guide the strategy of service first. But yeah, decide if you decide on those things, and then stick with it and apply grit. Also, domain expertise versus a tool set. So, if you know a domain, some people know accounting really well, and the tool set can vary whether they use, QuickBooks or we actually use Wave Apps as a different application here at InfoRight. Right, there's so many different accounting tools out there, but decide if you are going to be a specialist in a tool set versus a domain. For us at InfoRight, we don't really have one domain. It's a little bit eclectic. We're kind of a mutt. We kind of have. I mean, our clients have been in healthcare, and then in mining, and then in financial services, and then in a few other niche areas for us. And so, like I said, silicone rings is one, and then a few actually others who are consulting themselves. So yeah, there's different areas of expertise where you can, different domains where you can have where you can show your expertise and demand a premium for that. But then others, are really have a tool set, um, or have mastered a particular tool set. And that's kind of where we are. It's more data and analytics and function, and we're not just general consulting. So, but I said here, consider the big 3 to 4 consulting firms. So, right, they're big enough that they are hired for both technical implementation and for strategy and consulting, and design and everything in between. But I would say they're mainly strategy. Really, honestly, I don't know what the breakout is. How much of theirs is actual implementation of technical stuff versus just strategy. But if I were to guess, it's probably more strategy. But so anyhow, but I've definitely seen, people at Deloitte, for example, who have dashboard experience, and they present Tableau dashboards, for example, to senior vice presidents at these bigger company at actually at one of my clients. I saw one of those, and so um, the point being, consider where your strengths are, but also where you can make the biggest impact, and where customers could take you on. Also, expect more hours required. So, for me to ensure that I had a certain income, and also that I can have contractors, I had to make sure that the demand's there, but also I expected more hours to have to be worked. and sometimes I overbook myself. But yeah, and sometimes Saturday is a work day. So anyhow, those are considerations. And also, I talked about the checklist to grow a business. Um, there are many checklists already out there. I think most checklists are too generic for one's business model. Even the checklist that I shared a little bit earlier, it's probably not directly applicable, all of it you know, to each of your um, situations to be able to start and grow a business in your situation. But hopefully, it helped some to give you some ideas. Another lesson learned is comes from the E Myth. This is a book that's been around. I actually read it when I was in college, and it's the entrepreneurial myth. So basically, there's this idea that most people who start small businesses are entrepreneurs. I love that that's a myth. And then to the fatal assumption that an individual who understands the technical work of a business can successfully run a business that does technical work. And so, yeah, I mean, these definitely can both apply to me. And really, the lesson, the takeaway from the E Myth, the book, it's by Michael Gerber, and I recommend it. Um, but I recommend you read it. But the takeaway that I have from that has been um, is that I need to make sure to find people who can actually do, who I can delegate to, and who can do the work. And I should not think that I'm going to be able to start and grow, I did start it this way, but I won't be able to grow a business by always doing the technical work. I'm going to have to find other people to help me, and I've begun to do that, and I'll continue to do that more. But that's definitely a critical step. And so, put another way, if you decide um, you want to do the technical and that your strength lies in that because you enjoy it, that's okay to start with and maybe for freelancing, but it's not all that you need to start a business. And so, really, just know that there's a whole lot more to having a successful, even freelance business, even a single person shop. There's nothing wrong with that, and it can be very profitable. But you do have to know that, I mean, you're still going to have to take care of your own accounting, your own marketing. Do you mainly get, is it repeat business and referrals? Is that how you get all your business? And so maybe that'll work. But you just need to know that y- those are part of running a business, and it's definitely different and not the technical operations of the business and doing the work that you really enjoy in that case, unless you really enjoy those things too. There's also the janitor part. I'm my own head janitor. um, and actually, if you look at my desk, half of it, I'm failing, half of it is pretty decent. So looks like I need to improve a little bit there. And um, you're your own accountant or bookkeeper unless you hire that out. So, right. So, point being with the E Myth here, and the point I'm trying to make, you need to delegate where possible. Um, and uh, so, good. Um, with that, let's see. I did want to put this plug in for there's a book by Angela Duckworth called Grit, and I'm a big fan of grit. So, grit is her equation for grit. She has a whole book on this subject and did a lot of research in it. It's fascinating. But basically the takeaway is that grit is what people need to succeed, and talent is one thing, but you can succeed in something even without talent, because grit um, she posits that grit is most important, and grit equals talent is one part talent and two parts effort. And so, even if a person is not the most talented, they can apply two parts effort. And really, just as they apply effort, that will count more than their talent in doing a thing. And I wholeheartedly agree with this, and I love the equation that she came up with here. Um, and so, and yeah, so grit, definitely apply grit. And I subscribe to this, and I encourage you to as well. And that will help you to achieve. And so that's grit. And the last thing here is that I wanted to mention were a few things about another book called Lean Startup, and this is by Eric Ries, and he actually has it on audiobook, and I've listened to that several times now. Excuse me. Uh, so I've listened to that several times now, but um, it's kind of like my startup Bible. But the reason why is his whole point is you run business in a data-driven way, and make sure that it's data-driven to the extent possible. Everything about it, your clients. How do you get your clients? How do you? And it's hard with a smaller sample of clients. It's hard to be data-driven and really show statistically that things are statistically significantly different because you made a business decision one way or the other. But do to the extent possible, you make decisions based on data. And so his whole concept of an MVP, I believe this applies not only with products that you create, but in my situation, in my situation, it would be with InfoRight, it's going to be services. And so he talks about something called a build, measure, learn feedback loop, and these are ways to improve your business. And I encourage people to check this out. But a few things more about it. He talks about how it's not what people to figure out if someone pays for a service or a product, it's not always what people say they want, or it's not what I think that people want. It's what they actually demonstrate that they want that really is the most important. And so how do you apply this to a services business? And so as my last kind of little example here, in my case, one of my one of our bigger clients, it's a mining company, and they've said a couple times in phone calls with us on it, just right in front of us, and with other people, they'll say, InfoRight's expensive. They say that, almost like that's offensive. So they'll say it's expensive and to have us, um, and so, I was a little bit taken aback when they said that. They said that twice in meetings over the course of the first month or two that we were with them. And I'm sure they're saying it, in closed door meetings when we're not there. Um, but they continue to work with us because they like what we're doing. And so it's okay that they perceive us as more expensive as the next company. I'm okay with that because I want them to think that we're worth it. And so it's okay to set a higher rate as long as you deliver value. And if the client is perceiving that you're delivering value, even at a higher rate, then it can work out to charge more. And in our case, that's been fine. And I've realized, when he first said that, and the first time I heard the my main contact say that in a meeting with me there and some others, I was taken aback, but I'm glad he's being transparent and he continues to work with InfoRight. And he's been with us, and in fact, we have another full-time contractor who's working there. So it's I'm there part-time and he's there. The other person is there full-time. So there's a reason why he sticks with us, and yet he still maintains that we're expensive. It's because he finds additional value from us. So that's okay. So with that, I'll close, unless there's any other questions for like a minute here.
I don't see any at this time. So
Okay.
we'll just give it probably another 20 seconds, see if we have any questions drop in.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I had a questions page that's not here, but yeah, any questions?
And I'm not seeing any come through.
Okay.
Well, with that, thank you so very much, Chris. Really appreciate the presentation, and I can definitely say that I obviously can't speak for the entire room, but I definitely learned something today. So thank you.
Great. Awesome. Thanks. Thanks, Justin. I appreciate it. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone.